in your role, there's maybe only like public company CEOs that have more stakeholders. Can you talk about how you see kind of like the things that you need to do and the things you need to be able to, how many people you got to, kind of like take into account in order to pull off a project like this in a way that you would deem as successful?
We had been talking about this. There are a lot of stakeholders, and every project that I've worked on, this is even in what we call greenfield development. So if you are out in the suburbs building on new dirt, you still have stakeholders there, but especially when you're in an urban area, you're doing redevelopment. There are people that live there, the people who work there, let alone the city officials and other groups that have an interest. And I think the most important thing is trying to build consensus. You're not always going to make everyone happy, but trying to build consensus among what people want and would like to see in a development that's in their city, in their neighborhood. That's fundamentally what I think is really important about doing these, and also we're a fiduciary to our investors' investment. And so it's balancing. And by the way, I think these are all, we're all swimming in the right direction on this with building consensus in the community and returning our investors a good return. Because when you do things that are really great for the community and they're successful, that also has a good return on it. So, I think building consensus is one of the more important things that I do day to day. And there's a lot that goes into it. You had mentioned, when we were having the conversation before this, there are like political elements to it for sure, but you also have to be able to listen to people and hear what they're saying. And if there are certain elements of retail or design or things that they want to see, it's also taking those words and figuring out how to incorporate them.
I like that, man. And I did say political element. And what I think it's more what you said, it's consensus building, right? Like you're one part urban planner, one part money guy, one part operational, whatever, but always a consensus builder is what it sounds like. And there's a question in the chat that says, so making majority happy with the project is key, ? And I wonder if you can expand on the idea, what the difference is in your head between making the majority happy and building consensus.
They're not mutually exclusive by any means, but, I think building consensus is, when I hear making the majority happy, I think that's a little bit more black and white than what I think consensus building is, which is trying to find, it's trying to take input that people are giving you and, incorporating that into what we're doing. And it doesn't mean someone likes blue. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of our buildings are going to be blue, but we got to figure out why blue is really important to that person and figure out how meaningfully to incorporate. I'm just obviously using color as an example, but there are a lot of, public spaces, for example, where, the public spaces that we've proposed so far, we're looking to get public input on that as we move through our process. What do people, we think in our design team has put together some really great thoughts, ways that we can activate those spaces through, yoga and again, more festivals, those types of things. But through our meetings with community members, council members, public officials, the community itself, there might be some really great ideas and figure out how we can incorporate that into the public spaces.
I love that, man. And I'm glad that whoever asked that question checked in with a text. So it just says not your average guest. So I can't give you credit unless you tell me who you are. But I think it's such an important piece to this idea of creating win-wins, that somebody sees himself as a consensus builder, right? Like Leslie's in the chat talking about how Lerner Square has had this transition where these like state developers are now kind of like trying to do this thing that's upsetting a whole bunch of people. And yet we always talk about the fact that aligned incentives here is really what creates great business models that create win-wins, like JWB being vertically integrated and being the person that sells you the property, manages the asset, manages the relationship for a long time. And then on top of that, invest in downtown because they're invested in this city, and just how that creates great scenarios. And it sounds like they went out and got a guy to lead this thing that believes that same thing, that believes this idea that you want to get people to enroll into this big project and be pumped about it, much more so than just like getting it done and pushing it through, which I think is great.
Yeah, I totally agree. To our sponsors, JWB and DLP Capital, they share, I think, the belief that we have to be consensus builders, that we're building, in a city that's there and in neighborhoods that are there with people that already live and work near there. And, that's really special and unique to have too.
Totally. I love it, man. I often, again, contrast it to Miami, where like all these like out of state developers, these people with very short kind of life cycles and trying to make money and rip it out,
Yeah.
and get out, have built something that people don't, like it's great for out of towners, but it
Well,
hasn't been that great.
sorry to interrupt, Pablo. I was just
Yeah.
going to say, I mean, that, one of the challenges, honestly, is,
Yeah.
for some people, like developer is a 4-letter word, and so
Yeah.
to
True.
come in as someone that's trying to think outside of the box on how you put all this together and make it successful. Some people are a little suspect, and that's okay. I think, that's something that, is par for the course. And I understand why, because there are people out there, like you mentioned, Miami, Miami is an example, but there are a lot of those examples everywhere where, you don't necessarily get the quality that enhances neighborhoods.